This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity. This is Synchronicity.
Welcome to Synchronicity. My guest this week is Diego Rivera. You know him as Yung Pueblo. He is an Instagram poet, writer. I mean, I say Instagram, I lead with Instagram because that's how I found out about him. That's where he has a large audience. But he's really just a writer and a poet and someone who uses words wisely to affect positive change. That's a simple way of saying that. I've had him on before. He's great. He wrote a book called Inward. Go check that out at ideally your local bookstores, Barnes and Nobles, even just any place with physical books. But of course, it's available everywhere, and you can get that. I really highly recommend it. It's a very kind of centering tool that if you kind of needed some centering, it's a good thing to have. We talk about a lot of stuff in this episode. I say that how can you not talk about a lot of stuff in an hour? But especially with me, I'm trying to jam packing topics into that time. So we really do cover a lot of ground. But one of the probably most important aspects of what we spoke about is this idea of at what point do you say, I am a teacher? I am someone who has accumulated knowledge or wisdom, and now I will bestow that wisdom upon other people, or have some either financial component of saying, hey, I created a course or going to a retreat or something like that. Where is that line? How does it work? How should it work? How does it actually work? And I always think about this issue. I mean, how can you not? I think just even my, beginning forays into trying to figure out how to monetize podcasts and a network and all of these things from multiple different angles for going on, 5 or 6 years. It really, you think about these things. So where's the line? And Diego had a wonderful kind of take on this, which I think is the hallmark of people who really do these long meditation retreats, these 30-day Goenka style Vipassana retreats. He had a really good saying about this, which is, I am not a teacher. I am very careful that when someone asks me, to go lead a meditation course, that I say, no, I'm not qualified to do that. And this is someone, truthfully, who's probably more qualified than most people if he wanted to do that. But he recognizes that there's a line there that as long as he views himself still as a student and acts like a student, he is kind of like a sponge soaking up and having a perspective that he finds useful for his kind of day-to-day, as he calls it, how to be less miserable on a day-to-day basis. So that's really crucial and important, because I think what happens is a lot of times, and I always say it's psychedelics, meditation, but in both of those modalities, if you have a really profound experience, it could be anything, right? It could be your love for the first time, whatever it is, romantic love, whatever. It sticks with you and kind of alters your consciousness in such a profound way that you sometimes have the desire to make that everything you do, right? Whether if you're going to now be a meditator, now you're a vegan, now you're a paleo, now you're exercising, you get really into these things. You want to become like an evangelist for this, right? Like you're the evangelical, whatever it is you're doing, vegan, meditator, mushroom taker. And some people even take it a step further and kind of weave in, I can also make money from doing this. So, I'll brand up a kind of niche in the consciousness marketplace, or I'll be a meditator person, or we'll have retreat centers, or whatever it is. There's a tendency to want to do that. So, oops, I hear my music coming in. I'm going to mute that. You can't hear that. I can hear it coming in. So that's a very interesting line, I think, that everyone has to kind of think about, even if you're not thinking of starting a business, but how much do you want to make this your life or a part of your life? What's the intention and desire below that, driving kind of that desire to make this a broader part of your life, or make money with it or from it, or be a thought leader? And I think this is important because it seems to me, and I reference it a little bit in this episode, but this happens far too often in communities, spiritual, psychedelic, far too often. Any introspective kind of consciousness study, paranormal stuff, is there can be a lot of kind of just scammy, bullshitty stuff and shady and unsavory characters. Not to just say like these are bad people, but they're not maybe in it for the same reasons that a lot of other people are in it. And this is one of the perils of trying to organize, is that you can really run into this friction and infrastructure, as Diego puts it in the episode, these kind of frictiony balls of, chaos. They, that's how we can go into any relationship if we choose to, if we're just operating from our egoic standpoint. And often that's pretty much what we do. And it's understandable, especially in like the business world, right? And making money. Like that's how a lot of people operate. So truthfully, rather than me rambling on about all of this, the grander point is that I think that line is very interesting. The teacher versus student, the sophist versus Socratic type of mentality. I think it's very interesting stuff. That's all I want to say. You'll also hear from Diego in this episode just how grounded and centered and honest he is. I think transparency is really important with anything you're doing. That's why I try to wing it. I wing almost every intro and outro. I don't have notes. I just try to remember and recollect. What's going. Recollect. It's recollect. We'll go with that. Parts of the conversation that I thought were personally impactful, just because if there's an aspect of winging it, which is you can say, oh, you're unprepared, you're not really doing any work on it. But I think that you're operating kind of the edge of this wave, the crest of this wave, where, if you're bullshitting, that's going to immediately become clear. And if you're not bullshitting, maybe that's also going to become clear. Maybe not always, but I think that's important. That's why I try to operate from that space, which also can make it more difficult to kind of center a brand or something around that. So again, these are questions that I personally think about, that I think are interesting. I look at other people and think these things are interesting. So this is officially Super Ramble. Weed is good. New York is, pardon my transgression. You can go ahead to the episode. It'll probably be like 10 minutes or 12 minutes or 15 minutes or something. You don't have to listen to me. I'm going to talk about weed for a little bit, so bear with me. Cuomo, this guy's not my kind of guy. What is he doing? New York is basically introducing legislation to legalize recreational marijuana, which is great. No one's going to be that upset about that. But the way they're going about it is so New York, it's ridiculous. It's egregiously high taxes at every step of the process of growing, distributing, consuming. It's ridiculous. And it's like really high taxes. They have a variable tax rate for, it's going to be higher for flower material, like weed that you would buy and smoke, as opposed to trim, which is very interesting. Very interesting. Any cannabis people, and I'm super serious about this. This is not some pipe dream, pun intended. Really isn't. Hit me up, noah@syncpodcast.com. I am kind of folding people into a think tank about how to do some cool things related to cannabis in New York, and hopefully broader nationally and internationally in, the future years. But starting where I live, I have people interested in this. I only really if you have like you feel you can genuinely offer something. I'm serious about this. Anyway, the other thing they're doing is there's no seed to sale. So there's no direct, you can't grow a plant, process it, turn it into an edible, and then sell it to a consumer, which is good and bad. The good is that medical companies, like they have in other states, they'll go in, get the foot in the door, establish that they're credible, set up regulatory things that are medically, stringent, and then they'll go in and just flood the market once it's, recreationally legal with their product, and basically monopolize and corporatize the entire sector, which is shitty. And so they're upset about it, which is good. That means they're doing something good. If the big medical companies who came and thought they were going to be the front runners which is often not minority and women and other people who have not large sums of money, you can't get into that. That's good that they're complaining. The bad part of it is that we're kind of separating all of these different parts, like, and they're not letting people grow, which is obvious. That's my biggest gripe. They're not letting people say, hey, you know what? I want to grow a few plants because it's a plant and I can grow it. And I would like, just like I would a tomato, I don't want to be forced to have to go get the tomato in a grocery store if it's not as good as the one I can grow. Right. That's super important. So I don't know how this is all going to pan out. That's what I'm saying. But it does look like New York is going to be legalized at some point in 2019. I imagine there's going to be kind of a purposely set up long discussion about some of the finer points that they've overlooked in the plan, but it's pretty cool. And we're definitely moving into some interesting times. And the new about to be appointed Attorney General, William Barr, has basically said, listen, we're not going to go in and fuck with states where weed is legal. We're not going to fuck with those businesses. But he's also like, we should totally oppose it nationally because it's a bad scourge. So you win some, you lose some. But anyway, I don't know how I got on weed. Oh, yeah, I do, because I've been rambling. Weed's good. That's it. Let's get to the episode. Here it is, without further ado, Diego Rivera, a.k.a. Yung Pueblo.
Hey Noah, how's it going? Sorry.
Well, no, don't. No need to apologize at all. It's noon on a Monday, so no more needs to be said. How you been, man?
I've been pretty good. Kind of running around trying to get everything ready. I'm about to go away to meditate for a month. So
Where?
I'm gonna go up to Western Mass. To
Barry?
meditate. No, at a Goenka retreat.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. How many?
Yeah.
How long are you doing it for?
30 days.
Oh, silent?
Yep.
It's
silent.
Goenka, yeah. Oh boy, man. I mean, I never really I forget like intermittently like why you're so smart and awesome, and then I'm like, oh yeah, he does these retreats for real. Like he actually goes and sits. Which, I mean, it sounds crazy to say that, but like, dude, like, how many meditation teachers are there who, did one retreat or one thing and now they're all of a sudden an expert? Like, I will say, for most of the people I've come across who are successful kind of writing or speaking about this stuff, they really do make it a priority to build it into their lives. So, it's
for sure. I feel like the writing is and speaking is almost like secondary to just like to what I'm doing, because I mean, if it was really up to me, man, like I'd just be meditating. I'd be doing this all the time.
Man, that's refreshing to hear. It's refreshing to hear. It's not necessary. You ready to get started, by the way? We cool to start?
Yeah. I was just gonna ask about like how your wife and child are doing.
Oh yeah, man, they're doing great. We have another boy coming in the summer too. Yeah, man.
That's incredible, man. Good
yeah,
for you.
We're pretty excited. It's it was planned. It wasn't like an accident, so it wasn't like whoops. The next one might be a whoops if there's a next one. So we'll see. But yeah, man. Don't let anyone tell you smoking weed makes you infertile, because it doesn't. If anything, it makes it easier. So yeah. Yeah, man. Everything is really good. The family is great. Things are wonderful in here upstate, and yeah, pretty good. Can't complain.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's really good to hear.
Yeah, man. And my mom is calling me right on cue. Decline that. She never really understands when I say I'm recording a podcast that it means I'm actually recording a podcast. Yeah, man. So yeah, let's just get started. I mean, I figured the reason I asked when I did is because what we're talking about has really and continues to be at the forefront of my consciousness, and just kind of this nexus of talking and speaking about, in your particular case, the benefits of going inward and meditation and kind of the internal practices that you've learned, but in any realm of consciousness, psychedelics, any of these things that people use to kind of get in tune with themselves, any modality. and how kind of the intersection of that and business, creating a living, creating a sustainable living kind of can get conflated very quickly in a lot of people, both large and small, known and unknown. And what you were talking about, which I was commending, and just it really, brings to heart for the people I know who have been doing this, consistently for decades even, is you were saying if it was up to you, you'd just be going on these silent retreats all the time. It's like your preferred thing to do. And the other stuff, the speaking and the writing, is kind of secondary, which I think is really like a very awesome approach to this, which also, leads, as I'm sure you know, to success, outwardly.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I think I mean, I guess we should. Are you recording already?
Yeah, it records from when I pick up, so I can edit whenever I want.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I know that I feel like I learned so much through meditating that it drives my curiosity, and it sort of it's the thing that gets me most excited. I love to learn and I love to just be less miserable. And I feel like that's what I get from meditating.
Mhm.
But at the same time, like I really do love what I do. And I want to be like an effective individual that really gives back to people and supports people, in whatever path it is that they're walking. So to make things that, people can actually think about, that can get them to know themselves a little better, I think, I'm really lucky and like fortunate to be able to, do that for a living. But yeah, in a big way, I think meditating really comes first for me.
It's just like, it's a very important thing that I really, like I was saying, I think it gets lost a lot because the things that can come with constant practice, especially with meditation, can be kind of a clarity that can help in many aspects of life. One of those is kind of effectively being able to communicate the things that you've learned, which is incredibly important skill, especially for something that you described as actually makes you less miserable. In your case, just to be like draw a clear line in the sand here, I think the reason that I got tuned into you initially and kind of resonated with what you were doing is because it was clear to me there was something underpinning this that really it didn't see it was authentic. It was kind of a visceral feeling of this is a real thing. And in this day and age, as I'm sure you're aware, many of these people are your outward competitors. A lot of people kind of put on the crown of being a meditation expert or being a whatever type of expert it is related to consciousness or spirituality. And sometimes it's totally valid. And I love your name, Yung Pueblo, because what it essentially gets to young people is that it's okay to be young and have an authentic, resonant, and wise voice. There are older people, it's not an age thing, but to be able to allow for these new voices to rise, but at the same time, making sure that that intention, that kind of real practical importance for whatever those people are speaking about is actually there, is something that I think gets lost in this day and age more and more, at least from my genuine experience. And I know we spoke about this a little bit last time with
Yeah.
Lineage and Sharon Salzberg, but it seems to be a very prominent recurring theme, at least in my field of consciousness.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in a place where I really am enjoying being a student. I don't want to call myself an expert in anything. I just feel like I'm learning and sharing.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because even in the name Young Pueblo, like when you dig deep to it, I feel like I was literally just, walking down the street earlier, coming back from the gym, and it hit me, that the name Young Pueblo is really just a commentary on how collectively we're all very young. Like if you take all of humanity, we're to think that, okay, there are people who are older and wiser, and then there are people who are younger and have more to learn. When you really sort of group us as one entity, we're very, very young.
Yeah.
So it's funny because in a way, I feel like, yeah, the name is not, it doesn't even really describe me. It's more so what the purpose of the project is, to like write these books under this name so that we can all hopefully grow up a little bit so that we can make a better world.
Yeah, yeah. And I also think about kind of knowing your background as coming from the activism world too, which is kind of fraught with some of the dynamics that I've noticed in the spiritual world as well, right? People talking about these things. And I'm curious, I mean, what have you, I'm sure this has come up during your meditations, having worked in those fields, but it seems to me that the level kind of organizational conflict that can happen with
Yeah.
really I'm listening now to this Frederick Douglass biography that came out last year. It's fantastic, and you realize very quickly that abolitionist is a very broad and blanket term of which there are many different subgroups when this was actually happening, when they were trying to get rid of slavery, and they were often in conflict with each other. And it's not that they were bad people necessarily, or less ethical in certain ways. It was that they were young radical ideologues, right? When you're doing activism, those people tend to emerge and drive movements forward. But I sense in you, kind of when we spoke about it before, that it can also be kind of draining and it can be exhausting. So how kind of has going inward and doing these meditation retreats kind of shifted your perspective or broadened your perspective on how to deal with some of those things?
Well, that's one of the things that I feel is most special about today in human history is that, all throughout so many different eras of human history, there have been groups of people who wanted to change the world to be much more humanistic, much more less painful of an experience, so that people can have, their material needs met. But I think the only thing that's really different about now that makes it so special is that we actually have the tools that are so widely available now more than ever before.
Yeah.
I think there's still a ways to go in regards to accessibility, but more than ever before, people can really find things that can transform themselves, heal themselves, and really get to know themselves at such a profound level that they can actually say, yeah, I feel freer, not just in the external sense that I can, move about as I please and be able to purchase what I want and not have an outside force impinging on my freedom, but really internal freedom, like a new dynamic that helps you, have an actual inner peace.
Mhm.
And I think when these things move in conjunction, when they move side by side, I think the amount of transformation that we're going to see is going to be so much more profound. Because I really feel like, it's hard to say, but a future global peace is really going to be built on a foundation of individual inner peace. The more
Yeah,
that we
yeah.
have inner peace within ourselves, it's going to be able to support. And it's funny because as you are actually able to cultivate that within yourself, what you find is that like you were saying, organizational sort of tension that happens, and it's really because like the ego is so dense. What you're really having is so many different egos interacting with each other. And what do egos do? They're literally balls of friction, and when they come into contact with each other, obviously sparks are going to start flying, and
Mhm.
there's going to be these eruptions, and people are going to feel sort of tested and feel that like aversion towards each other so that they won't quite be able to work together. But when
Mhm.
we do that inner work, what happens is that you're literally releasing the denser parts of your ego so that instead of just focusing on, okay, I really want to be right, I can more so focus on long term goals and really support the collective harmony of the organization so that we can be more effective as opposed to me necessarily being correct. So that
Mhm.
give and take is much better balanced. And it's quite amazing because like I found that in my own life, like man, before I started meditating, I felt like I had zero creativity. And now, like I would never have imagined that my life would have led in a way where I'd be a writer. But I think meditating really unlocked a lot of that stuff because it was just so, it was, covered up by so many dense layers that I've been working on. And man, I have so many things to work on. But it really showed me that, I can have a new ability to problem solve. My creativity can flourish. And, I can have more energy to just do more things in life.
Yeah, that's really it's an interesting metaphor of, or not even, it's actually what it is, these balls of friction,
Yeah.
egos. That really is, it's such a really kind of resonant thing you're saying there, because that is what it's like when you and what appears to be going on for a certain subset of people. And I think this is speaks to the power of community and speaking about these things as much as possible amongst ourselves. But it seems that these balls of friction are, maybe they were slightly hidden by a veil before that we weren't easily seeing, all of the time. It seems now that this veil is kind of lifting and we can more readily notice our own, hopefully, that's the harder part, but especially in other people, these balls of friction that are there. And like you're saying, the amount of energy it takes to maintain that is really burdensome. It's
It's
cumbersome, right?
exhausting. It's exhausting. My God. I was literally thinking the other day about how when we give to each other in a manner that's sort of really expectant, that it's tied up with attachment. I think that's one of the reasons why people just find it so draining to try to support each other because a lot of times like it's hard to give selflessly. It's almost like that's something that we have to cultivate within ourselves. But when you really just like give something to someone selflessly, you're not gonna burn away your energy.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing to think about when in regards to giving.
Yeah, well, I've learned that with just having a kid because there are a lot of times when it's like I mean, for those who don't know, I'm sure you can imagine, you're just basically supporting a young kind of nutball. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, this is a crazy individual who's emerging here. And you really like are tired all of the time when you're just kind of maintaining this, especially if it's like multiple days in a row. And you recognize there is kind of this wellspring though of energy that if you're doing it not kind of in like an obligatory sense, like I have to do this, but you're like, I love my progeny. I'm going to continue to like support and love them. You notice there's like these huge reservoirs of untapped energy that like, I think this is one of the reasons that like, if you engage in a profession that requires some level of selfless service just to kind of maintain. So, nurses, a lot of times where you're just doing kind of stuff like you want to make sure this person is okay because it's your job in some respect. Those people are, I find, very often very strong internal reservoirs of strength because they kind of are just doing this thing that creates this internal space rather than fixating on themselves. Now, there's obviously a relationship between those types of jobs and trauma and all energy that goes, dealing with that. But it is this kind of this selfless giving is such an important concept that really is kind of like a fusion generator of energy. It's fascinating to think about it like that.
Just to bring it to a really mundane level, I saw a meme the other day that cracked me up so much, and it was basically someone saying, "Oh, that my child is like my broke best friend." It made me laugh because it's a situation where you're just giving, and it's
So
such a
crazy.
funny thing that the rearing of children and having children is like such a big part of the human experience for a lot of people, that it's just funny to think that we like a lot of us, in some way or another, whether we become parents or not, we are given the opportunity to give selflessly.
Yeah.
And it's funny to think that like all of the global, the whole world is set up in this way where it's like, okay, like now here's your chance, like give it a try.
Yeah, and it's one of these things I realized too that like if there was one theme that I think carries across like every aspect of my life, my interests, my passions, it's definitely this it's community. It's the growing sense of how your immediate community, your family and close friends to just the people who are kind of going to be there for you. Like that does kind of feel like the pillar of which we got to build this new foundation on because like if we don't, like you were saying, like I also believe that it is possible to move into an age of peace, right? Of something that is just fundamentally different. Like we're marginally moving towards there, but it's still very siloed off for too many people. But I also recognize that if we don't kind of form these like stable pillars that we can build stuff on, it's
Right.
going to be a harder and much more kind of difficult task and probably a slimmer chance of actually, enacting what you and I are both envisioning.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I love that you mentioned community as a pillar, because that's one of the things, like one of the sort of directions that I could see the world moving in is, democracy is a very like long-term project that should be evolving, and I think one of the avenues that it can take is, applying a deeper democracy where actual communities, like let's say like, and within cities, like having sets of blocks, because one of the big hurdles that we have to overcome is atomization. One of the reasons
Yeah.
people are so lonely, they feel so, it's one of the things that sort of aggravates depression is this lack of community. And I think one thing that can inject sort of a rejuvenation of community is actually giving communities power so that they are forced to interact with each other, and not like forced in a way that's coercive, but in a way that's it's to your own benefit to speak to each other. Because if we have sort of some type of democratic and monetary power to decide, okay, these are the resources our communities have, what should we do? Should we like fix these potholes? Should we, build a new school? Things like that, as opposed to just having it be a top down situation where it's only your representatives and only your mayors saying, okay, this is what we're going to do with the resources we have at hand, which is all well and good. They can still be there and present, but to just sort of allow a bigger sharing of that power will help people to, come together in these small assemblies
Yeah.
and actually have these conversations, monthly or like quarterly, and really get to know their neighbor in another way. And it, it is a situation where like, right, people will disagree, will agree, but it creates a bigger opportunity for people to humanize each other. Because if you really know your neighbor and you understand that, okay, oh, you also want safety and you also want good schools and you also want access to good, hospitals, then it's going to be much less
Yeah.
likely for you to harm them.
Yeah. I mean, that's critical to understand. And the things you mentioned there are just things that everyone wants, regardless of your political affiliation. Like, no one's like, nah, I want shittier hospitals and schools. That's my platform. It's like, no, but it is really that, like, I envision exactly kind of what you're talking about. And I actually see people doing it in my local community. Some of my friends and who I've become friendly with, and recognizing that this really is kind of like a canvassing community centric thing first, right? Because I just recently, I'm not going to mention any names or the specific organization, but over the weekend it's called to my attention that inside of kind of this psychedelic community, there were some words exchanged against a kind of an elder stateswoman of the scene and kind of a young entrepreneurial upstart, both of whom I tangentially know and have come across in multiple avenues. But at one point, some of the language that was used was just like it was like the term that was actually said was irrelevant and referring to this older woman who, she's not older, but she's just older than this guy. And I was like, man, like, how do you say that to someone on an internet if you're trying to be kind of like a thought leader or someone who's talking about building community? Like, those are the things to me that I think, just to tie this back into what you do and what you're really about, this meditation stuff, like, if you're getting to a point where you're calling someone else irrelevant on the internet and you're
Yeah.
fancying yourself as kind of a thought leader or someone has something, some wisdom to share or offer, like, it's that stuff seems to be kind of bubbling up to the surface. And that's what I was talking about, those friction balls kind of being more evident to
Right.
people. It seems like that's kind of what's happening. Yes, the good is certainly getting kind of, you know, more accessible and more easy. Your Instagram account is accessible by anyone, and it's just like a nice soothing kind of like tea for the mind when you come across it. But we're also seeing incredible levels of contentiousness and egos flare up. But I think that's kind of the good that comes along with this. I guess where my question kind of is going for this is, what aspects has meditation really helped you with in terms of dealing with your own kind of shadow, unobserved, kind of darker, elements of your psyche? I mean, I know that's a big benefit of it, but I mean, can you talk a little bit about that and how it's helped you?
Yeah, I think there are this is a really funny example. Last
Yeah.
night I got like a really weird message from, and now I can't always respond to every message, and I honestly don't really try to, because if I did, it would take up way too much of my day.
Yeah.
And I think I'm much more effective if I have these sort of boundaries. Like I'll post and put up stories and respond to a few messages here and there, but I also need to have my space. I
Yeah.
shouldn't be on my phone all day every day.
Yeah.
But I ended up reading this one message, and this guy, so he was like I don't know if he was upset or not, but it was a weird message about how I shouldn't say, you know, like something I would write. He was like, "Oh, we all know that you shouldn't need to write that." And it was like, one, it was funny because it was coming from someone who was like supposed to be like a Zen person. And I was like, okay, I was like, cool. And I turned to my wife and I was like, should I just like explain? Because the thing is, like, I will write clear instructions sometimes in my stories, because there are other demographics that people aren't aware of. Like, there are more and more sort of like 40 and 50-year-olds who are
Yeah.
using Instagram who don't really know how to use it well.
Yeah.
So, I'm not explaining things sometimes for people, to, like, let's say for a story, you can press and hold a story,
Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
actually be able to like hold it so that it doesn't go away in 15 seconds. But like a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
So like if you do know that, that's fine. Don't worry about it. um, but it was funny, like, this like sort of angst coming from someone, And I was like, okay, I was like, that's cool. And then I felt the urge in me to be petty, you know,
Yes.
to like even respond and just be like, come on, man, like, this is I'm not doing this actually for you. I'm doing this for someone who's new to the Instagram world. Because there are more and more people who are using Instagram every day. And but then, I like showed it to my wife. She laughed, and I was like, I want to be petty, and she said no, like like don't be petty, like, and then better. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, let me just put it away. And so like from little things like that, where it's like, okay, why create more friction in my own life? If I already feel it inside myself, like there would be no value in me continuing this interaction. To
Yes.
like the deeper, darker things you know where I used to deal with so much sadness and anxiety to the point where it was like actually literally controlling my life. Like I remember I spent almost like a year just like avoiding everyone besides like two close friends, my now wife, and my family. But
Mm.
I went from having so many friends and really being a very social guy to just saying no to every invite because my sort of anxiety, my feeling of like worthlessness, and my feeling of like my lack of love for my body, just feeling so out of it, led me to just like not just like literally avoiding so many people for a long time,
Yeah.
for about a year. And eventually I was able to come out of that. And then when I started meditating, I was like, wow, I couldn't even really recognize how dark the situation had gotten. But when I started meditating, I started realizing that like, oh, like, situations that literally used to bring me anxiety and tension, I feel a little more peaceful in them. And now I can, behave in a way that I actually want to, as opposed to a way that I regret. But it's pretty amazing because, like, you think you get over a lot of things and you don't quite realize how rapidly you're repeating
Yeah.
patterns and how rapidly the subconscious of the mind is actually reacting. That, the same type of thing will come up over and over again because you literally just don't see how layered it is.
Yeah.
But I can tell that there is some sort of progress because I'm kinder to the people around me. I'm kinder to myself, and it's really hard to like actually measure like how much did I actually let go, like how many patterns did I release,
Yeah.
but you can see in your interactions with yourself and with other people, like, okay, my interactions are actually much more harmonious. My life feels a bit more productive, and I feel generally happier. And that's how you really measure, how much you've let go.
Yes, I love that you referred. I mean, so you said so much amazing stuff there, and I also want to acknowledge the many wonderful qualities of having a wife is always being the person who's like, yeah, don't do that. Do you know? I mean, I've had
Yeah,
identical conversation 20 times in the past few years, and she's like, don't do that. That's
don't
not
do
going
that.
to be just like you
I,
don't want to do that.
it's
Uh,
funny because people like people compliment people. I get a lot of compliments, but I one of my most often thoughts is like, like you think like I know stuff, like my wife knows stuff. Like
yeah.
I don't know anything.
It's true. I totally get it, man. I totally get it. I also love this idea of kind of measuring your progress to the best of your ability and also kind of retroactively sometimes that takes years. Like one of the I call it my Dolphins fan level of mental success, which is basically 10 years ago for me, 15 years ago, if I watched the Miami Dolphins play and they lost, which was often, just like now, I would
Yeah.
be enraged not only in the immediacy of the loss, depending on the severity of it, but for like a week, I would be upset. Like
Wow.
just a ridiculous amount of time. And over the years, I've finally gotten it to the point where it's basically like, all right, they suck. 2 seconds after the game is over, I'm moving on because how much can I invest emotionally in this? But it really is like it's little things like that. And it could be just your reactions to your loved ones, your children, your significant others, your family, your friends, customer service people, but there are these kind of like things, signposts we can put down in the ground and recognize that, like, you know what, this is progress. It maybe doesn't mean
That's
we're
enough.
perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's really, I love that idea because I think this very much. I'm sure you see the irony of this too, of really operating on a platform like Instagram, but people want immediate results always, and we talk about it so much, it's trite, it's almost like a platitude, it just
Yeah.
loses all resonance. But the reality of the situation is that's how we function now more than ever. And something like meditation can really take years potentially to really give you like a clear sign that this is, yes, you can get some immediate results, of course. It's not something that has to take years, but it really is kind of like the slow, committed, turtley path towards success, which is something that people aren't kind of conditioned to. So like how do you go about kind of dealing with and combating those expectations that I'm sure you encounter plenty of times?
Yeah, oftentimes I find myself responding to the same question over and over, and often that question is like, how do you let go? Like, how do you do it?
Mm, mm,
And a lot of times I feel like, it makes sense to me why Western society has become so, inclined to using pharmaceutical medicine. Like one, because it works, and two, because it's fast. Um, but I love something that Ruby Warrington from the Numinous, she really
yeah.
calls this era the now age because everyone wants everything right now.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree with that more. But it's funny because in a way, I feel like Western society's hesitation towards meditation is that it takes time. And it's like, oh, really? Like, I can't just like get inner peace right now. And it's no, you can. And I really agree with what you said. I think you definitely can see immediate results, but if you want, profoundly transformative results, that requires some consistency, and that's another thing that you know um, people from this now age sort of recoil against because consistency is difficult, especially
Yeah.
when we have such sort of scattered minds because of the all the technology that we use and whatnot. But I think if
Yeah.
you really want results, you want consistency, you want to continue going at it. And I think it was funny because I remember I went to a number of 10-day Vipassana courses before I started meditating daily, before I started meditating like morning and evening. And it was when I actually started meditating morning and evening that I started seeing real deep, like much quicker results. And that was really life changing.
Mm. It makes sense too that the kind of morning and night as both kind of like you're a different person at the night than you were in the morning. If that's not clear, it'll definitely be clear if you start to meditate, just because you've gone through a whole day's worth of stuff. How many thousands and dozens of thousands of thoughts and emotions have you probably gone through during the course of a day?
Exactly.
So, yeah, it makes sense that that would kind of be an accelerator. I mean, I think it is like this idea of putting down signposts along the way is just one of the tools that meditation provides, because it's like, okay, well, what was going on then? What was going on then? What was going on then? And also, I think it's funny you mentioned Ruby Warrington, because I know she's very much into astrology. I think it's one of these kind of intersections of kind of the meditative mindfulness mind state and kind of modality and astrology, is because astrology is literally just putting down signposts everywhere. It's just like boom, 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 boom. This planet's in conjunction with this. This is where you were born, so this means this. And that isn't something to some people that can look just like total like nonsense, but it really over time can show its benefits by like letting you know like maybe there is something else going on, maybe there is another perspective that you're missing out on, or you would be helpful for you to know. And I think that's kind of like, again, it's so counterintuitive where everything like we're telepathically in communication with each other, one to many, all of the time, and all of us. It's not just kind of designated for people who have large followings on Instagram. If you have your friends and your 200 followers, 100 followers, like you're constantly connected with this stuff. It's just so kind of anachronistic to be thinking about something like, oh, I got to do this every day for how long? The rest of my life, like 30 days. It's just like it's not how people want to think about these things. But I think again, this is very much related to the hard and kind of difficult and uncomfortable work that needs to be done kind of for the part of ourselves we don't like looking at. And that to me is kind of like the pivot from where we can go from kind of this like very high pitched egotistical kind of mindset, self me focus, to kind of what we're talking about, which is these communities coming together, recognizing the interconnectedness, the same wants and desires, and trying to move that forward. It becomes pretty obvious at a certain point.
Yeah, there's one thing that you're saying is making me think about how there are a lot of thoughts that we're having, or even like more like sub thoughts, just like mental connections that are happening that we're totally oblivious to.
Yeah.
You can hear yourself thinking on the conscious level of your mind, but in the subconscious, there are like so many connections
Mm.
and so many observations being made that are like triggering responses inside of you, that we're totally oblivious to throughout the day. So it's funny because I remember the 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 meditation teacher that I listen to, as Goenka, he talks about, the reason why you do meditate in the morning and in the evening is because you were actually, while you were sleeping, you were making tons and tons of these sort of like mental knots, having these heavy reactions because you're like dreaming and you're moving around and there's tons of things happening even while you're asleep. And then you wake up and you're, building a whole nother set of reactions during the day. So it's literally like, you meditate in the morning to clean up what happened during the night, and you meditate during the evening to clean up what happened during the day. But when you take that into regards, like connect that to your entire life,
Yes.
when I think about, like I'm 31 years old now, and I did my first meditation course when I was 24. I literally, and I told my wife, I was like, wow, I was like, I didn't meditate for 24 years. Like for 24 years of my life, I literally just like build reaction upon heavy pattern. And it literally led me to like being pretty miserable.
Mhm.
and,
Mhm.
and to think that, like going away for like 10 days, 20 days, 30 days sounds like a long time. But when you sort of literally add the number of days compared to how many thousands upon thousands of days where you've been sort of reinforcing a particular conditioning of your mind that doesn't even really support your happiness or your mental clarity, and you compare that to like 10 or 20 or 30 days that you're really taking the time to sort of address that situation so that you can be happier, it's not really that much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and not only not that much, but maybe actually necessary. I mean,
Yeah.
what's interesting to me is we were speaking a little bit this before we were started recording, but the people I know who really do this and speak about this stuff and teach about it, the ones who I think are generally walking the walk, they're the people who recognize it's not like they did 10 years of 30-day retreats, annually, and then that was their quota. If anything, they recognize, like you have, that like it's important to keep doing this stuff. If anything, do it more. Like you become more aware of kind of the subtle karmic knots you're creating,
Yeah.
all of the time. I also, just to mention, I love the idea from the Goenka lineage of this idea of dreaming and creating these patterns while you're dreaming. Because I mean, this is a relationship that Socrates used to kind of for his proof or evidence of reincarnation was, saying, listen, when you go to sleep at night, do you remember going to sleep? And it was a whole kind of wonderful analogy. I think it's in Plato's Phaedra, but it's fascinating kind of proof of that. Like, just because you can't remember what was going on doesn't mean stuff wasn't happening. And this is a very good kind of powerful reminder that, yeah, we're creating karma for ourselves all of the time. Even when we're relatively aware we're creating karma, we can still be doing it. So imagine of the amount of mindless kind of karmic knots that we're building up. It's a profound kind of thing to think about.
There's this funny thing that I learned historically that I haven't been able to place dates on yet, but I know that there's a story of a fully enlightened being that was around like 200 or so years after the Buddha. And he traveled all the way to Greece. And he
Mm.
actually ended up talking to a Greek king and sort of like expounded on the Dhamma. And the king asked him a ton of questions. And it's actually like it's written down, it's codified. I forget the actual king's name,
Oh, wow.
but but this happened, and I'm so curious if this happened, before Socrates or after Socrates, because a lot of the things that Socrates does talk about are pretty, they're relational to karma.
Yes.
And I wonder, like where did this idea come first? Because even, I mean, the idea of karma was around even before the Buddha was around, more than 2,600 years ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's very old, and I think I think it's sort of like that Eurocentric mentality that attributes a lot of these ideas to these like ancient Greek philosophers, but I feel like it's all really coming from India.
I mean, it makes I mean, we know historically that things we're discussing are much older than the Greeks. And I think even when you go and look at a lot of the Greek philosophers or Western philosophers, you can identify the ones that were influenced or had knowledge of a lot of these kind of ideas. I also imagine there's some profound relationship between the mystery schools that were going on as a form of lineage, kind of akin to tulkus or other kind of enlightened beings being reincarnated and passing down wisdom. That's basically just lost completely for better or worse, depending on how you look at it. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that this stuff also can be arrived to by many different means. And one of the best and most reliable ones, if you have the patience and kind of diligence to do it, is this inward pursuit, is recognizing that there may not be something out there that's going to teach you about yourself, that it's you inside and kind of just this crazy mind, conscious and unconscious, that we possess, like that really holds all the clues for us. And that's a very kind of like, again, it's not palatable for a Western mind to hear that. It's like, what? Like, I want the quick fix. Like, I want the hit to be able to go and do this. I want to find that thing that is going to make me, a better person, which is a very noble pursuit. Of course, it's not a bad thing, but it's also something that, like, it is a slow and often painful process that we're not conditioned to like. It's just, we're not at this point. And it requires people like you writing about this stuff in simple and authentic terms. And I mean, that's something that I'm always astounded by and reminded by just on you, because I'm not a heavy Instagram user, but I follow you and I do see your stuff and the resonance of it, right? Like I said, there is a current of authenticity to it that is felt and perceived by people relative. Like, I feel like someone could jack your words and put it up on their Instagram account and I'd be like, nah, it's not the same. You know what I mean? Like, that is something that there is a thread that kind of maintains and emanates from people who are really actually walking the walk. That's basically what I'm getting.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I want to, I do sort of try to sit myself in between psychology and philosophy and try to, like, just explore these different ideas of, that people are experiencing in that universal human condition. Even though we may have very different mental contents, the structure of our minds are essentially the same. The same way we all have like two, or we're sort of like evolution tries to have us, have like two legs and two arms and all of that. The mind is the same, but it's funny. Sort of, like positioned myself in this way where I'm describing things intellectually. I'm trying to, even though it's a minimalistic format, it's still write things down and you're sort of cognizing about it in your mind, and it's on the conscious level of the mind. But I really try to support the message being that it's more so through your feeling, like through not your ability to think, but your ability to feel, that the letting go happens and that the transformation happens. Because a lot of times, like, the human beings have gotten so good at reading. People read all over the world and more people are learning to read. But that really sort of continues generating more intellectuality, which is all great and fine because it's the intellectual part of the mind that's really built this world.
Yeah.
But when you want to profoundly transform and profoundly develop your freedom, you actually have to cultivate other facets of your mind. You have to cultivate your awareness. You have to cultivate your equanimity, your compassion. And these things are, can be supported by intellectuality, but it's really through your ability to observe, your ability to feel, that all the magic really starts happening.
Yeah, see, now that you've put it into eloquent words, what I was getting at, which is this ability to feel and kind of perceive, dropping down into your heart, as Ram Dass would call it, going into your intuition, whatever terms you want to use. That is truthfully where what we readily call miraculous and magical happens. Like, that's the realm it exists in. And it's interesting that the intellect is so fascinated by those kind of miraculous or synchronistic or magical occurrences, but you're right, it can't get to it in the same way as kind of the experiential knowing. And what I'm encouraged by in this day and age is that maybe it's anecdotal and maybe it's my own personal experience, but it does seem to me that the cream is rising to the top and the bullshit is also rising to the top. So you just have to pick it off or choose what you want to deal with. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like they're separating and, that's all the bad stuff isn't popular anymore. All this nonsense isn't popular anymore. But it seems that kind of enough people are kind of dropping into their hearts and their felt experiences and those other kind of modes of consciousness that like it's encouraging. It's very encouraging. I gotta say.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there are obviously, still horrible things happening all over the world, and we should be very cognizant of them. But at the same time, like I've never been more hopeful for humanity because we have we talked about this last time. We have some gigantic challenges ahead of us. But I think like the same way that I mentioned before about, us being equipped with the tools to heal ourselves, like this is actually happening. I mean, I'm literally, I try to watch trends, especially on social media, and I love the one that I've really noticed is that I would say about for like 3 to 4 years, people were really discovering the idea of self-love and defining it for themselves and really figuring out, what is self-love for me and actually using that to transform their lives. But then that sort of has led into the idea of like, once you start loving yourself in that way, you get in contact with yourself and you start finding out, oh, I have this like, I like to give it the term emotional history. I have this big emotional history
Yeah.
inside of me that needs dealing with. I have to let go a lot of these things. So I feel like the big question now and sort of a lot of the commentary coming from a lot of different people is like, how do you let go? How are you letting go? What are you doing? And people are literally sharing with each other, well, I meditate Vipassana, or this person does X, Y, and Z. People do so many different things. There are more things that I'm even aware of that have actually helped people. And I feel like the next step is you're moving from self-love, you're asking yourself now, like, how do you let go? And I think the next step is really sort of bringing to light the actual practices that are really supporting people and actually helping them let go. Because I think a lot of people have found is that it's the answer isn't as easy as you would have originally hoped for, and that it
Yeah.
takes a little more work, and but the effort that you put in, I mean, it will give you astounding results, especially if you're using a good technique.
Yeah. And I think that underscores the importance of thinking of it like a process rather than something you're just gonna get from like, oh, you just get X and then put it with Y and then you got Z. There you go. It is kind of this idea of like, I mean, and it's like we laugh at it, but that is how we think about something. Think about like if you needed something today, a toothbrush, and you just go on Amazon or go to some place like, all right, I got my toothbrush, I did that, now it's coming here. It's like that's how we kind of think about things now. And it is important to remember that it is kind of this process, and letting go especially is a process. Do you know how many times I've had a particular kind of anxiety about an interpersonal relationship or someone did me wrong in my mind and I've let it go? The same thing. It's like over and over and over. And yeah, sometimes you're actually letting go of some aspect of it, but very rarely it's like you just say, all right, I'm letting go, and boom, it's gone. And dust in the wind. It's like this very kind of, if you do think of them as kind of like knots, right? Like it can
Yeah.
take some time to untangle. It could be a really big one you're gonna have to come back multiple times for. And it's interesting that you and important that you mentioned that it is kind of this idea of, all right, now that we've kind of found self-love, all right, now that we're kind of finding dealing these emotional kind of stories and briefcase of stuff we have with us, like now we're letting it go, now we're kind of bringing it out into the forefront of what helped us. And I think kind of bring it back to one of the original things we were talking about. I see the mistake in kind of our world, of me having a podcast talking about these types of things, you being a writer and speaking about these things, is that a lot of times people who enter these spaces and want to be thought leaders or people who are highlighting what you say is the natural step. I mean, how many people do mushrooms for the first time and just want to like tell everyone about their new mushroom business they created? It's like the idea that we can just jump from the experience to telling everyone about the experience sometimes needs to be reflected upon, and the man hours need to be put in and woman hours need to be put in to actually like build up the kind of foundational strength to actually talk about this stuff. Because I see that, like, if anything, I would say the current kind of the scene that exists now is more and more people are waking up to the fact that we are living in a very crazy time and that we have more strife, but also more power to change that strife into positive action than ever before. And the kind of awe that can come with a lot of these like amazing realizations can quickly lead into like, all right, how am I going to tell other people about this? And
Right.
I think there does need to be that kind of pause. And this is something that I know with meditation.
Right.
You reflect on this stuff and you say, what's the most effective way? Is this serving my interests? Is this serving other people's interests? And I think that's really important. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, because I'm sure you're seeing it. I mean, like, people pop up every day. They're doing this, they're doing that, they're doing the other thing. And some of them seem legit, some of them seem kind of shaky. So, I mean, what do you think about all this stuff?
And I really like, I don't want to condemn anybody because I don't actually know what people are doing, what they're thinking inside their heads.
Yeah.
Um, but I think I can mostly just talk about myself, and I feel like that's one of the reasons why I felt comfortable with writing, because I position myself in a way, and I openly talk about it, especially at the talks that I give in person. I decided to write because I know that what I'm writing today may be different from what I'm writing tomorrow. That this is like a long-term process of me sort of trying to, write down the things that I feel like I'm understanding, but also with the understanding that this may change, and I would hope that it does change, because I would hope that, a year or so from now, that my understanding has deepened, and that I would, go back and question what I've written before and try to, become even clearer. And I think that that's what gets me really sort of excited about being a student. I often get asked, and people are often kind of surprised and taken aback when I tell them I'm not a meditation teacher.
Right.
And they're like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, no, like, I'm just, I'm really focused on being a student." Because I mean, there are a lot of meditation teachers out there, and I also think that there are a lot of fantastic ones. But I really feel that I can most support people by just like continuing to be a student. And I feel like,
Hmm.
one, it's very it's supporting me and my path, and that's one of the things that I really love about the Cuenca lineage, is that it's pretty hard to become a teacher in that lineage. Like, there are teachers, but it may never happen, and if it does, like, it'll probably take like decades and decades for you to become a teacher, because they're sort of, their bar for like quality teachers is very, very high. And I really appreciate that. And I think it's fine, like, people sort of teach from their experience level. And a lot of times, like, the excitement of like mindfulness and meditation is very, it's very vibrant right now.
Yeah.
So people are going out and showing each other what they know. But and I think when people, start, doing their sample classes and meditating for like 5-10 minutes through apps, and meditating with individuals for 30-45 minutes, then eventually, they may sort of ask themselves, okay, like, I want something deeper. So then they go to, someone who can take you through like a 10-day course or longer and all of that, so that you can get even greater benefits. But I mean, honestly, like, it does feel funny sometimes having to deal with those interesting interactions, and people are like, "Can you teach this, like, 45 minutes, whatever?" And I'm like, "Nope." And I'm like, "Nope. Like, I'd be happy to talk about things, things I'm understanding about psychology, but that's about it."
Yeah.
And I write about these things, but and there's something else I wanted to touch on too, which really sort of like lit a light bulb in my head, and in regards to letting go. And I think one thing that I'm pretty excited about is the this like giant movement of questioning identity, and questioning the idea of like static identity, because I feel like when back in like 2011, when I first became interested in this way of thinking, I think a lot of the talk was around trying to find out who you really are.
Mhm.
And I feel like that definitely leads to some walls where, find like, who am I really? And I feel like one of the most important things I've learned from meditating is that this whole like mind body structure is so impermanent, and it's so rapidly changing, that trying to really focus on like, who am I, it might be you might be much better suited on focusing like, how can I free myself? Or like, how can I release these things that are limiting my happiness and limiting my clarity, as opposed to finding some static identity, just sort of being okay with having a dynamic identity, and just understanding that this like mind body phenomenon is so rapidly changing. And there's so many sort of like, trillions amounts of different cause and effects that are coming together to make this idea of Diego, um, that it's okay for that to change. Because I think a lot of times when I am observing myself and I'm finding some mental tension arising, a lot of it is surrounded around having a static idea of who I am and being like, oh, this is, because of my sense of identity, and I want my identity to be understood in this way, and I want my, people to think about me in this way, then I find that tension sort of erupts.
Mm.
And instead of being able to like let that go and just understand, like, that people can think about things the way they want, and I can live my way, and that live my life in the way that I appreciate, um, and allow that sort of like roving, moving sense of who I am, as opposed to it being so firm. I found a lot of freedom in that. And I think a lot of other people are too. So I'm hoping that that's something that gets more and more developed, is, just a dynamic identity. Like, you can change, and oftentimes your freedom is pretty dependent on you being flexible with who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know for me at least, psychedelics help kind of impart that message very quickly, because I did it at an age. I did LSD when I was 15, when your mind is kind of still developing, and the
Yeah.
ideas of identity are definitely kind of shifted and discombobulated for a little bit. But also, I mean, the who am I question was Ramana Maharshi's hack, right? He's like, listen, here's what you do. I did it when I was a kid, inadvertently. He laid down, pretended like he was dead, but didn't like pretend, kind of was like, I'm dead. And just kept asking the question, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And he's like, if you do that enough and with enough kind of like diligence and vigor, you'll realize the answer to the question is like, not what you thought you were. Like, definitely not what you thought you were. So, and that can potentially open up a whole other realm of kind of seeing the world and how things work. And I think that's important. I mean, it is like when we're pitching this stuff kind of like from a capitalistic Western mode of being, it's like, yeah, figure out who you are, figure out your true calling, figure out your identity. And I mean, we see this even in identity discussions and all the whole spectrum of gender politics, people's reactions to that. It is a very kind of nebulous place to try to analyze, but I agree. I mean, my conception of myself, I know I'm Noah. I know I have responsibilities and a family and all of these things, but I'm not too attached to the idea of what that actually means or is, because it shifts so much and it's so easily shiftable. That's the thing. It's not like, I need some major life catastrophe to change the way I'm thinking in the course of a day. It could be anything, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's like very, once you kind of get familiar with the way your mind thinks and you can watch it in that regard, like you recognize, like, you better be careful if you're going to say this is who you are. And I think that dovetails perfectly into what you were saying about kind of maintaining this student versus teacher mindset, which is, I do see the rush from people to be teachers. I think the benefit of having a beginner's mind and being a student and constantly curious and not necessarily saying you have the answers or this, that, and the other thing is really a message that I think more people need to subscribe to, because not only does it kind of operate on a more truthful and honest platform, but it also allows people to recognize their own kind of inner wisdom and truth, right? Their own ability to kind of be a student and come to some of these insights that you or me or someone else have come to. So it's very important, and I think it's a very key distinction in when we talk about this stuff. And I'm glad you brought it up.
It's so funny because now, I keep thinking about how human beings, we really function on the apparent level. Like, we like to see society as solid, right? Like, this couch is here and this floor is here, and looking at things on the apparent level, but we don't really like to engage with the deeper, subtler, almost
Yeah.
reality, that the fact that, at the atomic level, everything is rapidly, rapidly changing.
Yeah.
And I feel like in a way, it's like, we're collectively learning that it's okay to be a little more subtle. That, you may look at me as, apparently I'm some solid being. And if I'm solid in this way, I should also have a solid identity. That I feel like that's been sort of that friction with, people coming out and being like, hey, you know what? Like, I can change, and what I am is always changing, and that's totally fine. And that should be legally supported. And,
Hmm.
and I think that's quite powerful, because it's almost like, humanity having a conversation with itself,
Yeah.
also a deepening of consciousness, because a lot of times, what is, your awareness, like when you're meditating, your awareness is just growing sharper and sharper, so that more of what is subconscious becomes conscious.
Yes.
And I think human beings are understanding that, like, whether it's within the realm of gender politics or not, that who they are, is actually changing, and it's actually changing rather rapidly. But I feel like, once you really accept that idea of impermanence, it leads you to really amazing, deeper understandings, and just like allows you a lot of flexibility so that you can be free and happy.
Yeah, which is kind of the underlying point here, which is like, yeah, it's great to observe and debate and think about and measure, but it is like we want to be freer and happier. Like that's everyone's fundamental desire. No matter how we think we're going to achieve that, that's we're all shooting for the same thing. Man, I truly love speaking to you whenever we get a chance. We should try to do it a little more regularly. I know we're both busy people at times, but Diego, just wonderful. I want to end with the questions. Let's see if you've maintained your static identity on your favorite questions. I do this. I love it with repeat guests because they do deviate sometimes. Some people are exactly the same, but sometimes they deviate. So we'll see. What's your favorite color?
um, oh man, it's so hard. It's blue and black. Can I have two, or is it?
You can have no. I make the rules. No, you can't. What are you crazy? You can't have two. No, that's totally okay.
Yeah,
What?
blue and black. I think 4 days out of the week probably black. The other days blue.
I like it. I like it a lot. What is your favorite number?
Oh, seven. Seven. I love it. Sevens and threes.
Yeah, sevens and threes. I feel you on that. What is your favorite animal?
My favorite animal. I mean, I've been watching a lot of Blue Planet too, and I'm really loving me some dolphins right now.
Oh, it's my favorite animal. Good choice. Good choice. Dolphins are fucking cool in so many
Yeah.
ways. I know. I love it. And last question. Practical tip that has helped you in your life that you could share with people listening.
I think one of the biggest things is just wait before you respond. Like, literally just like take a pause, especially if something serious is happening. Just pause and marinate on it real quick and figure out how you actually feel before you start jumping into actions. And oftentimes, honestly, like the answer is non-action. And obviously there are times where you do have to act, but so many times I've been realizing that, I want to do something, but my urge to want to do it is for the sake of my ego and not actually for the sake of, supporting the well-being of all involved. And I think sort of giving myself the time to pause has really supported me in just like having better relationships and better everything.
I love it. If people are also equally loving what you're saying and haven't picked up your book, what's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, Inward is, and that's Inward. It's available in bookstores all around the world, and you can find it either, Barnes and Nobles or a local bookstore, and you can also find it on Amazon. And I'm online on Instagram. You can search me under Yung_Pueblo, Young Pueblo. And I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, where you can find me under YUNG, no underscore PUEBLO.
I didn't know you were on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, and I'm using Twitter as like it's really funny because it's a smaller amount of people that are sort of like reading what I'm writing there, so I'm using it kind of like experimentally, and I'm kind of just like I'm sometimes just like writing, like things that I wouldn't necessarily put up on Instagram.
I love it. I love it.
It's pretty fun.
Twitter is just digitized consciousness. We're just circumventing the little part of ourselves that like thinks of something and then says it out loud. We're just typing it now. I love it. Cool, man. I will have you again on soon because I truly, it's like I said, it's like a nice tea for the soul speaking with you and reading what you write. So we'll connect again soon, man. Thanks for coming on.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Peace, buddy.
Peace, brother.
But we have a strange anxiety that if we don't interfere, it won't happen. And that's the root of an enormous amount of problem. Life is earnest, and I've got to go on. Then your life is a drag, and not a gain. Now it's my contention, my personal opinion, this is my basic metaphysical axiom, let me put it that way, that existence, the physical universe, is basically fatal. There is no necessity for it whatsoever. It isn't going anywhere. That is to say, it doesn't have some destination that it ought to arrive at.
Thanks for listening to that episode. Diego, what can I say? Go follow him on Instagram, Yung Pueblo, Twitter, Yung Pueblo. There's a underscore between Yung and Pueblo, and Yung is Y-U-N-G, like Young Thug, but Yung Pueblo with an underscore. Go check him out. What's not to love about him? Cool guy, doing good stuff. Not a big head about it. Love it. That's it. Rate, review, iTunes. You know how you check your Facebook or your Twitter or your Google or whatever it is, and you sometimes how many likes I get, how many things. I like to do that with reviews on iTunes. So the next time you're checking your social media, you can go, no, I'm gonna follow the link. I'm gonna go to iTunes. I'm gonna do a rate and review, 5 stars. You don't even need to review it. I mean, you can if you want. But you just rate it 5 stars. Boom. That's it. That's all. Oh, I'm yawning and I'm taking this. I'm loving these intros and outros for this episode. That's it. I will see you next week with special things coming next week. That's all I'll say about that. Special things. All right. See you next week. Love ya.